Absolutely. Yeah, we're doing big things on the Indiana channel. Growth is fun, but it's an honor to be here. It's a pleasure, and I'm happy to dispel some rumors and talk some Hoosiers.
Dispel some rumors. Are there rumors
Yeah,
out there? So Alec, you contacted me maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, and we had done one show here where we went through win totals in the Big Ten. And I think we also looked at the schedules, of course, because that has a lot to do with the win totals. And then there might have been another Indiana related live stream that we did. So you took a few exceptions to this, and I'm curious to hear.
I did. Well, the video ends with you calling the season a very uninspiring 8-4. It starts with you obliterating the non-con schedule, which I'm not going to sit here and defend, but I did want to get into a couple of the non-con schedules, a little bit of Big Ten strength of schedule, and then kind of how Indiana should be perceived versus how the public's perceiving them. But kind of a I don't know how much time you wanted to spend on this, but a quick little game of guess whose schedule it is based on the non-con. I'll give you this one
Okay.
first. Marshall, Austin P, and Charlotte.
Marshall, Austin P, and Charlotte. We're talking about 2025, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, that sounds like Maryland.
That would be the Georgia Bulldogs.
Oh, I thought we were doing the Big Ten. Okay.
No, I was just
Never
going
mind.
across the country.
Okay. Okay.
I'll go Big Ten for you. Nevada,
You can do
FIU,
anybody, but
Villanova.
I just thought we were talking about the Big Ten. Therefore, I narrowed my search there. Okay.
Nevada, FIU, and Villanova.
Time out on Georgia's. You don't have Georgia's schedule correct. Their non-con schedule. What's their
They play
non-conference
Georgia.
schedule?
They play Georgia Tech too, but you only play 8 conference games in the SEC. You play 9 in the
They
Big
play
Ten.
Georgia Tech. Okay. So you read off three out of four.
Yeah, I picked 3 out
Read
of the
off all
4
the
because of the
conference, the
conference schedule.
non-conference schedule. Okay.
I'll give you a Big Ten team. Nevada, FIU, Villanova.
Penn State.
That is correct. That would be Penn State. And then an unfinished schedule, I believe, but Missouri State and Georgia Southern.
An unfinished. Somebody has a open date that they need to find an opponent?
Unless the schedule on their team website wasn't updated yet.
This is across the country?
This is in the Big Ten.
Georgia State and who?
Missouri State and Georgia Southern.
Oh, Georgia Southern and Missouri State. Well, I got to think that I know Wisconsin's playing a big team, and Iowa can't be Iowa, Oregon, UCLA, without belaboring it too long, and I'm sure they've got a third opponent, but that sounds like it might be Maryland.
That is USC.
Okay. USC plays Notre Dame.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. More than fair. But and then real quick, Big Ten strength of schedule. The easiest schedule in the Big Ten that ESPN released in their top 40 would be Illinois. They came in at 40th overall, 16th in the Big Ten. 15th in the Big Ten would be Michigan, 14th Nebraska, 13th Oregon, 12th Indiana, and 11th Penn State. So sandwiched right in between Oregon and Penn State, strength of schedule wise, I don't think it's that big of a deal given that Indiana is going to play 9 conference games in the Big Ten, that their non-con isn't exactly filled with heavy hitters, especially given the fact that it's year 2 in the Kurt Cignetti era. Now, listen, year 4, even next year when the team's built out a little more, the depth is there, then I could see maybe there being some qualms about them not scheduling a tougher game in the non-conference. But, I mean, this is still year 2 of a roster, and they're going to play 9 really hard games in the Big Ten.
Yeah. So again, I think it's pathetic and embarrassing that anybody, including Indiana, would go out and schedule the likes of who they scheduled. But I also it's not like I single out Indiana. I have no vendetta against Indiana. I will be blasting Penn State. I will be blasting anybody who schedules that type of non-con schedule. So again, let's clarify. Georgia does play Georgia Tech and USC does play Notre Dame. So that kind of mitigates the rest of it. This season, Maryland, Rutgers, Indiana, Penn State, they might be the only ones have horrific non-conference schedules in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I'll give it to a lot of the Big Ten. They do play a lot of big games. Like I did try and like find certain teams that would fit my narrative a little bit, and you find that, yeah, you know what, there really is no defending the strength of the non-con. I do though want to defend how Indiana should be perceived coming off of last year, because I feel like they're being grouped in a lot with this Iowa, this Illinois tier, this Nebraska tier, even maybe of like mid-tier teams in the Big Ten versus not being looked at like a Penn State or an Oregon. But Indiana and Illinois played 5 like opponents last year. In
Yeah.
those games, Indiana's point differential was plus 171. Illinois was plus 54. Iowa, 7 like opponents. Indiana, plus 137. Iowa, plus 26.
Okay. That might be slightly skewed by one score of 56-7.
And 66-0 for Purdue. But
There you go.
Penn State,
And those
6
count.
games.
Those count.
Yeah,
Still,
absolutely.
And Indiana playing also Rutgers did. We would have to sit here and go back and forth between Rutgers and Indiana, who played the easiest schedule in the Big Ten last year. That's not their fault. I've stated that a million times. That Indiana has nothing to do with scheduling the conference games, of course, just that they should be evaluated against the schedule that they played. Now, see, I would argue the inverse, Alec. I would argue that Indiana is still needing to prove that they've reached the Iowa tier. They've played one season at that kind of level. I would be, when we're talking Penn State and Oregon, they're nowhere close to that status.
Well, so evaluating the 1 year that Indiana has played and keeping it on the field, if you look at the like opponents again, where they played Penn State outscored their opponents by 111, Indiana by 90. So that was minus 21 towards Penn State. For Oregon, if you're going to count both Ohio State games, Indiana outscored them by 10. If you take away the second Ohio State playoff game, it was a 10-point advantage for Oregon. So when you look at the way they performed on the field against their schedule, they project to be a lot closer to that Penn State Oregon tier, specifically based on their play last year, regardless of who they played.
Okay. I somewhat liken this to somebody that argued with me that Tennessee outplayed Penn State because they beat Kent State 71-0 and Penn State beat them 56-0. At that point, what does it matter? We're talking about a lot of blowouts here. And to me, Indiana played 3 good football teams last year. What was impressive to me about Indiana was that if you would have told me Indiana went 11-1, and you told me that before the season started, I would have envisioned missed field goals at the gun and tipped passes and miraculous finishes and so forth. No, they didn't do that. They went out and dominated. They blew out UCLA, and that's kind of started their Big Ten run, and they blew out just about everybody across the board except Michigan in terms of their wins. So that turned out to be their best win, was Michigan.
Which,
to me,
listen, you're the Ohio, as the Ohio State guy, you can speak to it. Again, Indiana looked like the worst football team when they played Ohio State. I'm not going to sit here and tell you they didn't, but Indiana beat a Michigan. No, they didn't. Listen, they belonged. There was a lot of communication issues, and the crowd definitely affected them. But they were able to run the football at points in that game. But my point being, Indiana beat a football team that beat that Ohio State team. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they can beat Ohio State. That's kind of the point I was going to make.
Alec, if you want to play the connection game,
I know football math doesn't work like that, but no, I'm aware, but I'm just saying, like, it's the idea that, and I get it, that Indiana needs to put more on paper than just 1 year, but it's also that you have 1 year of Curt Cignetti that's building the system. You look at the pieces they lost. They lost Mike Kadick, the center. They upgraded there. They went and got Pat Coogan, who was Notre Dame center, for their playoff run. They lose the quarterback, Curtis Rourke, who is number 9 in the Heisman voting. They go and get Fernando Mendoza from Cal, who they were in a recruiting battle with Georgia for. Extremely talented. They're saying that he spins the ball really well, and he's adding a level of mobility that Rourke couldn't add. Again, Rourke played on a torn ACL for the entire season. They didn't even know. So there's an element in like explosiveness to this offense that we didn't even get to see. I like the fact that Indiana still has to prove it. The team feels that way. They have a chip on their shoulder. But if you just kind of look at the way they performed last year and the system that was put in place and the system we expect to see this year, like, it's the numbers are what the numbers are. It's not an accident that they were the 10th team in the playoff, and a team like Illinois and a team like South Carolina was on the outside looking in. And I think that, and I made this point on the show last week, that if Indiana was the team that got snubbed out of the playoff and blew out or beat up on an SEC team in a bowl game versus losing in the way they did to Notre Dame. And again, final score was 10 points. It wasn't a super competitive game for the large majority of it. But if you tuned out, you think Indiana lost that game by 17 or 20, when reality is it was close at the end. So I think that the perception that Indiana is further or closer to that Iowa-Illinois pack versus closer to that Penn State pack is not necessarily true. And while they do need to prove it, I like where we stand.
Well, we don't know what's true yet. We have to watch it be played. So right now we're in the off-season debate of whether you have more evidence on your side or I have more evidence on my side. That's where we are. We'll find out what the truth is when they hit the field.
That's the beauty of it.
I have not done any kind of deep dive on Indiana in regards to their personnel, like I will and do with everyone across the board. My basic points with Indiana are that I was impressed. I was on board with. I thought it was phenomenal that Indiana made a playoff. I would have selected Indiana for the playoff. Now, when you compare Indiana versus Illinois or South Carolina, of course, they made the playoff because they were 11-1, not because they had marquee wins or anything like that, or really, really tight losses against elite opponents. If South Carolina had one more win, or whomever you want to fill in that spot, Ole Miss or Alabama, obviously they would have made the playoff above Indiana.
Well, SMU was that last auto bid team.
Yeah, if you want to go through. Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. And I do get it. Listen, Indiana definitely has to prove something. You do something for 1 year and the expectation can't be, this is what we see. It has to be, okay, prove it again. But when you start to look at Curt Cignetti's track record, the way he recruits and the type of players he recruits, and I know you said you haven't done your deep dive yet, but the level of depth they're starting to build, they have some really exciting pieces in the class of 24 and the class of 25, and a really important date coming up in the class of 2026 in early May. So it's when you start to think of what the entire, I guess, ecosystem could look like in the way that the players specifically talk about what the team looked like from the outside, it's really exciting.
Hey, everybody. This is Alec Kieser. He's co-host on the Indiana channel. We want to make sure everybody's aware. And the show is Tuesday at what time?
Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern. Really exciting show tomorrow night. We're doing a spring game preview. We were crushed to find out that the game isn't being televised, but we'll have Jamie Jordan on. He's awesome in the Indiana space from the IU Reactionary. So, yeah, check that out.
That's every week, everyone. Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time for the Indiana Hoosier Show with Alec and the rest of the crew right there. So, Alec, I was interested to have this conversation with you because I didn't know exactly what you were going to take me to task on, but I had an idea. So if I got this straight, number one, I trashed Indiana's non-conference schedule, both last year and coming up this year. And
more than fair.
And you were just pointing out that other teams in the Big Ten and across the country do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've trashed them too. I just think but we're in a situation where I'll bring up a few other points that you may or may not disagree or agree with. Those opponents probably go back a few years at least. Usually when there's a big opponent on the schedule, it goes way back. These games have to be scheduled 13 years in advance. If it's a smaller group of 5 team, it may have been scheduled in the last 3 or 4 years. That seems to be. So it's not necessarily a Curt Cignetti thing. And I understand if you're Indiana of 2019, that might be a bad example. They actually had a decent season and went 8-5, but you know what I mean? If you're the typical Indiana team and your program's in that place, you're thinking, let's get to 6 wins. Let's get to a bowl game. Let's do what's best for us. And I don't have an issue with Indiana and any other program looking out for themselves, doing what is in the best interest of themselves. I just believe that these schedules should be better.
I actually full blown agree with you. And especially you look at Indiana in 2021, 2022, you're looking to project out the schedule for 25, 26. You're like, I don't want to see any team that could potentially give us a non-con loss because the Big Ten schedule is going to be murderous. Now the situation changed. Curt Cignetti changed the entire outlook of football at Indiana. The schedule is going to take a little bit to catch up. They do have a Notre Dame game scheduled, I believe, in 2030 or 2031. Which will be really exciting. But no, I think you make a great point. But at some point the schedule is going to have to catch up. I just don't know if year 2 is fair to start like blaming Kurt Signetti, which you're not. So
So
I
so
do
with
I
a
do agree with that.
so with the 2-game lead over South Carolina, Ole Miss, Alabama, et cetera, and others for the playoff spot, I had no issue with. And even again, my selection would have been Indiana for the playoff spot last year. Now, had that been a 1-game difference, I would have agreed with what I think we could have anticipated to have been the decision by the committee to punish Indiana for that non-conference schedule. But it was a 2-game lead, so I have no issue with that. The Michigan win is a good win. The rest of them are dominant wins over marginal teams or bad teams in the Big Ten, but they are dominant wins. And then I would categorize the Ohio State and the Notre Dame losses to be, I did not consider either one of them to be anything close to an annihilation. Were they close games? No. They were basically showing that Indiana could be competitive on the field, but not competitive in a threatening aspect. The Notre Dame game to me was kind of a slow burn that Indiana just, for as good as they were on offense, and you know what the numbers are, they average like 43 points per game, just couldn't barely get a first down after the first drive. And unfortunately, they got the big pass play downfield, and then they turned it over right after that. Or who knows, that they might have been able to gain some momentum and take it from there. And so I thought Notre Dame, what was the final 27-17? I thought it was a
Yeah.
much more decisive win than that. But again, I don't think they got annihilated. We've seen plenty of teams during the playoff era get annihilated in the playoffs, and depending on their status in college football, whether they are given some kind of a pass or not. But of course, Indiana wouldn't be given that pass. But yeah, a lot of teams got blown out in these playoffs. So
Yeah, I would say I full blown agree with the take that if Indiana was 11-2, and even if that loss was against Michigan, but say the loss was against somebody else, maybe they lose the Washington game that Rourke didn't start or something. Like it would be a lot harder to make the argument based on their schedule that they deserve to be in. And I think Indiana fans were prepared for that, which is why blowing out Purdue and making that statement was such a big deal. But again, to the 2 losses, where Indiana got exposed was over the middle. You had Egbuka, who destroyed them over the middle in the Ohio State game, and you had Julian Faison for Notre Dame, who I think he had like 6 for 100 or something like that, but they just couldn't cover him in the middle. That was actually one of the areas they addressed. They went out and got 2 or 3 different corners. They brought in Ryland Gandy from Pitt. They brought in a nickel/rover, Devon Boykin from NC State. They also went out and got Amarion Knighton from Northern Illinois. So they tried to address that position. We'll see how it ends up going. And then they just have a bunch of dudes from the class of 24 and 25 who can slide into that safety or rover role, as well as brought back Lewis Moore from Ole Miss. So they went out of their way to try and address the issues they faced covering the slot and being a little bit more athletic on defense. So, but yeah, it's looking at their schedule last year, the fact that they had so many dominating wins is why Indiana fans are so confident, because it's not just that they beat bad teams. They did exactly what great teams do to bad teams.
except they weren't a great team.
Well, they were it depends on where you want to put that cutoff, because they were the 10th best team in the country. And their only 2 losses were to the 2 teams that won the college, like that were played for and won the college football playoff.
They were the 10th ranked team in the country. We could debate all day where they truly placed in college football. I don't think they were the 10th best team in the country. I'd put them above 20, but somewhere in that range.
There weren't 12 teams that could beat Indiana on the field that could match their scheme and beat them with athletes. It just, you saw the way they looked against these fringe teams. Like Illinois was 50-49 against Purdue in overtime at home. Like that's the 13th best team in the country. I don't know about that.
Yeah, there's always one game that you can point to for a lot of teams. We can go through one game scenarios for a lot of teams. I don't know that I was exactly going Illinois' route when I was looking for better teams than Indiana.
I'm using Illinois because they popped up on the screen, but
sure.
Even Iowa lost at home to a good Iowa State team that went and got obliterated by the only playoff team they faced.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been going at Iowa either. But yeah, the 10th best team in the country. Yeah, that's difficult for me to stretch them up that high. But
Well, and again, I'll
again,
say like there are two fan bases that have every right to look at the Hoosiers with skepticism, and those being Ohio State and Notre Dame. So
yeah, well, don't clump me in a fan base. That's not my
no.
perspective
I'm
on
just
college football. But
no. I'm just saying in terms of like who there are large fan bases that are entitled to have those types of opinions towards Indiana because they played non-competitive games with them. So I do acknowledge that that exists.
I would have loved to have seen Indiana play. If I could pick 5 teams last year, I would have loved to have seen them play South Carolina. Would have loved to have
Me too.
seen them play Miami
Yep. With Cam Ward.
with Cam Ward. I could pick out all sorts of teams. Would have loved to have seen them play that Iowa State team that you're talking about, or play.
Arizona
Arizona
State.
State was the champions, so I don't want to go that route. I'm trying to find teams that are
BYU.
in their classification. BYU, or there's a glut of SEC teams. Shoot, throw Texas A&M out there,
Yeah, we would have handled them too.
well, you think you would have handled them. I would have probably taken Texas A&M to win that game. We'll never
again, more
know.
than fair. We will never know. But
Yes, we will never know. And neither outcome would surprise me whatsoever. That's why I'm throwing out these teams. Like, I would have a slight lean one way or the other, but Indiana beating Miami, Miami beating Indiana, neither would have surprised me at all.
I mean, that's Miami's again one of those teams. What were they, 15 to finish the year? So I mean, you're right in that 10 to 15 5-team range. Like it's not exactly that insulting to say that that would be a close game. I mean, that was a playoff team for 75-80% of the year.
I don't know that Indiana would have wanted to mess around with Ole Miss.
I actually completely disagree.
Yeah, I don't think they would have
Completely disagree.
wanted to deal with that team.
I think Indiana was licking its chops at a lot of these SEC teams on the fringe that were doing a lot of talking and providing a lot of bulletin board material.
Yeah, I don't see Indiana being able to put out some of the performances that Ole Miss did.
Well, we're Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost at home to Kentucky and Vanderbilt and who else?
Not Vanderbilt. They lost to Florida. They lost to LSU.
LSU.
Who I'd throw LSU in there. I'd love to see them play Indiana.
That's a team that lost to USC, no? Early
Sure.
to start the year.
I'd love to see USC play Indiana.
Me too. Like again, these are mid-pack Big Ten teams that Indiana was just blowing out of the water.
I don't know that Indiana would have been able to put up some of the results. USC played a better game against Notre Dame than Indiana did, for example.
Yeah, that's also a rivalry game.
Okay.
But no, that's fair. Like again, those are teams loaded with 4-star and 5-star talent, and the biggest issue Indiana faced this year when they were out athleted. When they faced comparable athletes, they blew out those teams. And when they faced good athletes that were well coached, it was a lot harder for them because obviously that's the game of football. It's physical. But there were a lot of times where they were in a lot better position than their opponents. And like you look at a team like Nebraska, loaded with 4 stars and 5 stars, they were absolutely lost on the field.
Yeah, they were. I don't know if they're loaded with 4 and 5 stars, but yeah, they've got better recruiting classes than Indiana, but they're in the 25 range there. I guess the culmination of everything I'm putting together, naming all these teams, is that college football, a lot has changed, but one thing that hasn't changed until I see differently is that there are 2 or 3 teams that are elite, and then there's another pack of 6 or 7 that are really, really good. And then it just goes off into a run of like 30 teams that you could throw together and on the same field at any point, and you have no idea what's going to happen.
And I'm arguing that Indiana is not in that super top tier of teams, but that next 6 or 7 teams, I'm telling you, they're not either knocking on that door or they're in it. And that's why I'm really excited for this year, because everyone's saying, well, the schedule isn't that hard. It got harder. They have really important road games. They have at Iowa, which isn't an easy place to play, at Penn State, at Oregon. The Penn State game is probably going to be the whiteout game. It's going to be a night game. It'll be cold. It'll be rocking. Like, that's going to be a real test. But if like the way we feel, me and Brad, when we talk about it, is we improved at quarterback. We improved in the offensive line. Surratt and Cooper are going to be better as receivers. We improved in the backfield. We brought back 3 All-Americans on defense. Mikal Kamara is going to be getting more one-on-one pass rush opportunities this year with the position change. Aiden Fisher had 108 tackles last year. He's back. He'll be the best returning linebacker in the Big Ten. And they have the best returning corner in the Big Ten in D'Angelo Pons. So, and they have Amari Farrell, who was a PFF darling last year and played really well. So they're going to have improvement. They have a lot of guys on the team who experienced those crazy crowds, that 100,000 people at the Horseshoe going crazy for the first time, and really were deer in the headlights in those environments. All those dudes came back. So it's not going to be the first time they face a crowd like that when they go to Iowa, when they go to Oregon, when they go to Penn State. And again, like Penn State, like that's going to be a serious challenge, but this team's ready for
it. Maybe the reason I use the term uninspiring, and let's separate 2024 from 2025. I've not made a prediction on this season. I was like running through schedules and making projections. Again,
I watched a bunch of those videos. So I do, and I do appreciate that you can look at all of these teams and speak credibly to them. It is really impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. I used to know a lot more. I got my head in business most of the day now. But anyway, to me, projection's different than I will make a final prediction. It may be 8-4. I don't know. Certainly, whatever it was last year, it was way off. I think it was 5-7. So there you go. Indiana obviously bucked the trend. Let me throw this number at you, Alec. You don't have to pay me for this one, but you can bring this up anytime. So it hit me about 7 or 8 years ago, looking at these preseason magazines, that they're way too conservative. If you look at them, they basically just take last year and make the obvious tweaks that we know, okay, they lost quite a bit and they gained quite a bit and whatever. And then it turns out to be something similar. And I thought, is college football really that stagnant where these teams don't change much from year to year? So I thought, what's a significant change in wins from one year to the next? And my determination was 3. Now, I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. It just it felt like that's a significant change from one season to another. 3, we'll go 3 wins. If you're 6-6 one year, you go 9-3. Hey, you increased significantly. You were an average team and now you're roughly a top 15 team, etc. You're 6-6, you go to 3-9. That's a bad drop off. So I took that measurement, Alec, 3+ wins or loss difference from the previous season. And I started marking each season and going back through the power conferences saying, let's see how many teams changed that much from one season to the next. So last season, 70 teams in the Power 5. How many do you think had at least 3-game increase or decrease in wins from 2023 to 24?
Part of me feels like I'm cheating because I feel like I just watched the video that gave the number, but I can't remember the number, so I'm not. So I want to say it's like, it was high though, like 65. Was it 65%?
Oh no, out of 70. Oh, 65%. No, it wasn't that high. So yeah, usually when I ask people this, and they've kind of caught on to this at this point, but early on they'd say, I don't know, 8, 11, 12. Well, it's usually about 20, 22. Last year was 29 teams. So well over a third of the teams had a drastic swing in wins and losses from the previous season. And obviously Indiana is the poster child of that. So it's funny because we get on here and look at these win totals. And I was doing this the entire time. I was saying the Vegas win totals seem to be pretty close. Every so often you'll see one and say, okay, I think they kind of missed it here. But most of them seem to be dead on. But they're not going to be dead on. About a third of them are going to be way off. We just have to figure out which ones those are.
I think specifically in Indiana's case, when you look at why they were able to make such a drastic jump last year, it's because they overhauled the entire football infrastructure of the university. It's not just that they went and got a new coach, they got an entire new coaching staff across the board. They didn't just start like looking into NIL, they became a major player in NIL. They upgraded the facilities, changed the weight room, they're getting new turf. Like it's a full frontal attack from the university in terms of we're going to be good at this sport because we care. And that has been the biggest change from Indiana from 2023 to 2024. And that has been like Kurt Signetti is the face of that, but like Pam Witten and Scott Dolson in the university behind it is almost just as important as to why they have been and should continue to be successful.
Got about 120 people watching us right now. If you're watching on Twitter, watching on Facebook, we appreciate that. That's awesome that you found us there. But please make it on over to YouTube because you can take part in the conversation in the chat here. And again, we got Indiana football talk, and we got Alec Kieser here, who hosts the Indiana show. That's every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and Jackson's on it, of course. And he has dropped the link there in the chat. I'm sure you've run into Jackson, Alec.
Yeah, of course.
Jackson's awesome.
I see it's funny to see people that I like have interacted with on Twitter in the past over the last like 6 to 8 months, and then see how different people are like looped into the voice of college football world. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah. So there we've got the Indiana schedule. And so when it sounded like the term uninspiring got to you. And I understand that. I couldn't even tell you, Alec, right now why I said that. I think my I'm saying all this off the cuff. There's nothing prepared here. I sit down with zero preparation every day and just talk. So that's no excuse. I need to be accountable for my words. But I think what was going through my head at the time was I thought, okay, if I'm projecting 8-4, that means they went 5-4 in the Big Ten, which means, it's okay.
No, I think it was right. I think your characterization of it was right. My problem comes in, and it's obviously not you, but starting from during that Notre Dame playoff game when ESPN and Sean McAdams are literally like obliterating Indiana's credibility, and
Yes.
ESPN spends the week destroying the credibility of Indiana to be there.
So it's 10,
like
by the way.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm on guard fully when it comes to protecting how Indiana should be perceived. And so that's why, but I believe you're right. If Indiana goes 5-4 in the Big Ten, that is a very uninspiring 8-4.
Sean McDonough is a great play-by-play. Yeah, Sean McDonough is a great play-by-play guy. But every so often he goes on a soapbox because he has something to say, and that's really not his lane or his role. If he wants to start a podcast, fine. But you're doing the play-by-play for a college football game, and you've got an analyst next to you anyway. Yeah, he started railing on the Big Ten.
That was the biggest problem with Herb Street too, is that like your position is supposed to be analyst who's giving like unbiased like conversation about the game, not like who should and who deserved to be there in that case. So
yeah, I'm watching this Indiana Notre Dame game, and I'm thinking this is the first playoff game of this format, the very first one, and Sean McDonough is already railing on the Big Ten, and I'm thinking, number one, this game was not a blowout. This game was a game that Notre Dame was clearly the better team. I'm not campaigning for some kind of close game, even though it was a 10-point game at the end. I think that was window dressing. But anyway, Notre Dame played a solid game. They were clearly the better team. But this was not like these teams don't belong on the same field kind of game. And then he clumps this into just an entire conference narrative. And I'm like, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon still have yet to step on the field. And you have just annihilated the league like it's rubbish based on one performance by one team that wasn't that awful.
It was crazy because Ohio State was, even at that point, perceptionally, if not the best, the second best team in the country. And then you look at the way Ohio State played in the last month of the season through the playoff, and that they were by far the best team in the country. It was not even close that the best football team was in the Big Ten. So, it just looked silly the longer it went on.
So, Alec, do you understand, even though you don't agree with it, do you understand the perspective from the typical college football fan? We got Erica right here. She's an Iowa fan who is basically thinking, okay, Indiana did what they did last year. That's great. They won all these games, but they did it against a marginal schedule. Not their fault in the Big Ten. Not their fault. They played who they played. And Erica, just to I'm guessing you're not completely up on Indiana's performance last year. They did win these games convincingly. But the thought that, okay, they did it once, we need to see it again.
I actually 100% agree with it. I think part of my job as an Indiana fan is, especially because I feel so confidently about my own team, is to battle against that narrative. But I would almost feel worse if everybody was like, nope, yeah, they're just good and handed it to them. And that was the way the team felt. Because, like I said before, the team has a chip on its shoulder. They don't feel satisfied with the way last season ended. And they do feel like they are being slighted. And so I don't disagree with the sentiment from college football fans. I think it's more than fair. I think if you watched Indiana last year and you paid attention this offseason, you are more confident than most that the trend is going to continue. But I think it's only natural to look at something happening once and like want to see it more than once before you just confirm it without, deep diving into it that it's going to happen again.
Yeah, a couple of people posted here about the ESPN angle on this Indiana/Big Ten situation, and that was obvious. They lost Big Ten football for the first time in the history of ABC Disney Television, and to get 4 teams from the Big Ten in over their prized product, which is the SEC with 3, and knowing that 3 SEC teams were just on the cusp of making the playoff, and they got knocked out. Rightfully so. They lost the games and did not have the record to back it up. Yeah, was there an argument? There's always going to be an argument, but they didn't earn their way into the playoff, and so that they were going to, again, their mouthpiece that night was going to take the opportunity to hammer away at the Big Ten, even though that was obviously way too
It was aggressive. It was really
jumping the
aggressive.
gun. Yeah,
But
jump the gun a little
listen,
bit.
you have a $3 billion TV contract, and I can see why some opinions may be swayed regardless of what the facts tell you.
Yeah, it's just you look foolish when you're doing that, and exactly 24 hours later, Ohio State's got its foot on Tennessee's neck by 4 touchdowns. It's
The
so it's
orange takeover of the horseshoe.
yes. So Erica, here I want to make this clear. Yet you didn't say it was a marginal schedule. I was actually that was my term, and I was being kind. We have a guest here. I was being kind. I thought Indiana's schedule was, but not their fault. They were given a schedule. For
Again,
example,
I'm not. I will not defend the strength of their schedule last year. What I will defend again is their performance, and they killed everybody.
Yeah.
So.
And Michigan has this situation this year. I don't know if you've gone across the Big Ten where their schedule was pretty brutal last year inside the conference, but coming up this year, for example, what I do, Alec, is I'll take each team in a conference and I'll take out the teams that they're playing both seasons, and I'll just look at the difference in, let's say, the 4 or 5 games that are different in the schedule. And Michigan's goes from, like, obviously everyone plays 9 games in the Big Ten. Their 5 different opponents go from like 31-14 to like 9-36 records in the conference. They have an easy schedule.
That's nuts.
They don't play one team in the Big Ten with a winning record from last year except Ohio State. They're the only team. They played one team with a winning record. Go look at Michigan's schedule.
That's crazy. I know Indiana doesn't have them this year, so I haven't really had to think of them. And again, there are a lot of questions there. I'll have to tune into TJ and see what he thinks about who's starting at quarterback for them and what they're doing. But that's again a team that was playing really well at the back end of last year, going into an obscenely easy schedule. That's probably a preseason playoff team.
Yeah, no, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State, the USC and Washington at 4 and 5 in the Big Ten are their 2 toughest opponents outside of Ohio State.
That's insane. That should be getting more attention than Indiana's schedule.
Yes, I've posted 2 videos on this. I do what I can, Alec. I try to get around to everyone, and I railed on Ohio. There's a little difference with Ohio State. In 2019, they did not schedule a power conference opponent. They had Cincinnati and 2 other teams when Cincinnati was a group of 5. And I railed on Ohio State's schedule that year. Now, there was a bit of a difference last year. Last year, they played in Indiana. That was a little tougher, but basically a group of 5 non-conference schedule. The only difference there was they did have Washington on the schedule. And then when Washington joined the league, they changed that out.
Yeah, kind of nothing you can do there.
Yeah.
Oh no, Ohio State again. You as an Indiana fan, I hope that they get to the point where they're scheduling a week 2 game against Texas and hopefully in prime time. I saw that the AD is trying to battle for that one, which is ludicrous to me that Ohio State has to battle for primetime games. But like that's the position I want to get to. But I also want to win football games and be able to recruit and build something. And I understand that if you're taking a roster that might not be ready yet and putting another tough game on the schedule without giving them time to mesh together, then it could get a little dicey in terms of what it looks like. But no, I actually fully expect that Indiana, as the Kurt Signetti era lengthens, that these early like they're too big of a brand to not want to put in these big games.
Well, I'm assuming that since that game with Ohio State and Texas is in Columbus, that Fox owns the rights to that, and they put their big game at noon Eastern.
Every single time.
Yeah. All right, Alec, anything else?
That's all I got. Again, we got an awesome show tomorrow night. Jamie Jordan's coming on from the IE Reactionary. And yeah, every Tuesday, 8 p.m., we're talking Indiana football.
The Indiana show, folks, is first rate. It's a good listen, a good watch. So head on over there, check it out. Jackson has left the link there in the chat, and get on over there. Or just, Voice of College Football Indiana. You should be able to find it in the search bar. They are growing by the day. So get on over there and get in on the ground floor. Alec, it was great to see you. I took my shots, and it didn't turn out to be too bad.
Mark, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.